there's still people coming in. I'll let Stacy continue to add people into the room as we go, but in the interest of keeping you all to time, I'm sure you've got a full agenda in the conference. I imagine most of you are attending virtually, but maybe some of you are lucky enough to find yourself in the great city of Denver this week for the hybrid conference. My name is Mike Kirkpatrick. I am a principal consultant with Heller Consulting in our digital practice area. For those of you who are not familiar with Heller, we are a company that offers strategy, implementation, and change management services to nonprofits and higher ed advancement teams. We've delivered approximately 3,000 projects over 3 decades of working with great organizations. Many of the strategy projects that I work on personally are involving technology selections like we're going to be discussing today, either through the development of a technology roadmap or solution selections for everything ranging from CRMs to content management systems, all the way through smaller components like event platforms, digital fundraising tools. I'm joining you today from a little community just northeast of Toronto in Canada. So we are just about 2:45 Eastern time right now. Prior to joining Heller, I spent 20 years in technology and marketing leadership roles in nonprofit and higher education. Biggest chunk of my career was spent at the Canadian Cancer Society, which is one of Canada's larger health nonprofits, national with, at the time, it had a very deep multi-affiliate type structure with territorial offices as well as chapter offices at the community level. And I was part of the selection implementation of CMS products, digital fundraising, marketing automation, payment processing, and just about any other kind of technology that touches fundraising and other parts of the organization as well. Fittingly today, our topic is focused on how to select fundraising technology. Hopefully that's the session you felt you were jumping on this one to hear about. So hopefully you'll stay through the end. What's brought you here today? We'll be able to get a chance to talk about that perhaps at the end, but perhaps you're thinking about changing up your current technology, actively shopping, or even in the middle of a selection effort yourself. So regardless of what's brought you here today, we're all faced with a common challenge when it comes to technology. And I usually think of this as centering around change. It's all around us. It's happening quickly. It's increasingly complex and it's never ending. And so with that, I'm going to take you through a goal of having you walk away with this with some practical advice that hopefully helps you with some next steps in your own selection project. We're going to start by exploring a process for how you can go about determining your technology requirements. Then we'll go beyond those functional requirements and talk about some things that should be other criteria that you're thinking about when you're evaluating your technology. We'll explore some questions that you can be asking yourself as an organization about how you make decisions and what's important to you as an organization. And finally, I'll try to leave you with some practical tips and some resources and links to get you started if you're just setting out on this journey. So there's many reasons that we embark on a search to select new technology. These are just a few of the reasons. But first of all, your technology might have become outdated. So being in the nonprofit sector, we really try to squeeze every ounce out of our investments to ensure that our donor dollars are being used wisely. But sometimes this leads us to keeping technology beyond its useful life. And this is a big part of that change. Sometimes vendors don't keep up with the change and it passes them by. Your vendor might have discontinued your technology. And this really isn't uncommon. There's many reasons why a vendor might discontinue their product for reasons like low usage and the related profitability, of course, which is driving their decisions. There's a lot of mergers and acquisitions that are happening in the marketplace. And sometimes you get a bigger company that swallows up a smaller one because they just want one small piece of what that company offered and they end up discontinuing the rest. And sometimes they just may have multiple streams and are doing the same thing multiple ways, and one of the 2 ways ends up getting discontinued. You might have outgrown your technology, either from a scale perspective or functionality, and sometimes it's less about the technology changing, but how your organization has changed. Maybe you've grown in size or complexity beyond what your technology can deliver. And your needs may change overall. Maybe you have entirely new needs that your current technology doesn't meet because it wasn't something you needed at the time you selected it. You might have even grown apart from your vendor, and this happens a lot too. It's usually a relationship issue, often related to services that you're getting, or in most cases not getting from the vendor. And the final one I'll just mention here is that new technology has emerged, and this is another reason that's very common with the draw of new technology. Maybe you didn't plan for it, but when it arrives, you think, is there a way that you could use this? And I think of all the coverage that we've seen in the recent weeks and months about AI and ChatGPT. There's probably a lot of organizations that didn't have AI on their roadmap of things they were going to be doing this year. But as soon as they saw it, they started thinking about how it applied to their organization and how they might be able to bring that in and start shopping around for tools. One caution there, certainly I always have with many technology choices, is find the right edge to sit on, whether it's, you don't often want to be on the bleeding edge, you still want to be leading edge without going too far over, because you can often get distracted from your core purpose and the purposeful planning that you put in place at the beginning of the year and what you wanted to achieve. So this last one around technology emerging and sort of driving decisions can sometimes be a slippery slope to go down. And I'll just note as we go through this, if you do have questions about anything that I'm covering today, if you want to just drop those into the chat, we'll have some time at the end to get through some of those, and any that we don't get a chance to today, I'll make sure they get added to the collaborative notes document and provide follow-up answers on those. So today we're focusing on fundraising technology, which is complex enough in its own, but you may also be shopping around on behalf of your organization, looking at other technologies to manage programs, volunteers, advocacy, analytics, or any other type of function that has software playing a role in running your operations. Some of the more common fundraising technologies that we deal with on a regular basis include some of the ones listed here. So nonprofit specific CRMs, anywhere from the really big platform solutions like Salesforce, NPSP, or the newer Microsoft Cloud for Nonprofit, to CRMs that have a bundling of suites, whether it's digital fundraising and marketing all in one, like Virtuous, Neon CRM, and many others. Look at donor management systems. Digital fundraising platforms is probably one of the more busy spaces that has so many emerging options all the time. And this is where you'll have a lot of these sub-bulleted points here bundled into a set of tools that could include things like donation forms. For those of you doing event fundraising, you'd have peer-to-peer pledging, as well as DIY fundraising, or anyone who's sort of running fundraising events on your behalf that wants a flexible toolkit to organize anything from a walk or a run or something they might be doing at their office to raise money, but still typically in a peer-to-peer model. You've got event management for any of you who do galas and golf tournaments, and many more features here. Some even include e-commerce like product sales, or if you're into symbolic giving as a means, and these tools can either be sold individually and you can build your best of breed solutions together, or you can find a solution that might offer all of them. And there are other small categories to the right I've listed here that look at other giving channels, areas like donor research and gift matching, but so many different categories. And it's really important to think about what exactly you need, because sometimes you may just want one of these things, but a good product may also have it bundled with other things. So do you buy to get everything, or do you just focus on your core need at the time? So when we at Heller set out on a solution selection, we typically go through a series of steps to try and understand functional requirements. This usually starts by documenting current state. So do you have a full inventory of the various systems that you already have? And it's not uncommon during this process to find that you may have multiple tools in place that are performing the exact same function. Sometimes even multiple accounts with the same tool. And email marketing is probably one of the ones that we see most often in this scenario, and form builders, survey tools being others. And it's because it's so easy for someone at a department level to acquire these tools. They're fairly broadly used across organizations, easy to implement, and relatively easy to manage with minimal technical skills. So they often fall into that category you hear sometimes of shadow IT, where people aren't going through their IT teams to procure software, but they're simply going out and finding something because they've either used it before somewhere. And you may find that if you've got multiple email tools, or 5 different people with their own MailChimp accounts, there could be some duplication, and that can lead to some real challenges, because you've got consent management in email marketing tools. And if you got 5 accounts that are not talking to each other, you put yourself at risk of people thinking they're opting out of your organization's communications, not realizing there's 4 other accounts where their email address may be captured. So it's important that you talk to your business users, and that's where this interview stage comes in. Find out what they need. Certainly look at your current usage, what's working and what's not working so well, but make sure that you don't get too caught up in the current challenges, because people love to talk about the problems they're having with their technology. Make sure you get focused on the future state, where people want to go, and look at the goals. What could they do if they had the capability to do so, and focus on the outcome, less about the current state problems. Make a list of those requirements that you heard, and ensure that they're organized by category, because once you've got this done, you can work with your business users to prioritize those requirements so that you know what's going to be important and what isn't as you move forward in the process. Where do you have flexibility when you're evaluating potential solutions against requirements? And where do you stand in the current state in meeting those requirements? And that's where that last stage of the gap analysis comes in. So if you are identifying your highest priority requirements and you know where your biggest gap areas are with your current system, that can really help shape where you should focus your search, especially if you're going through a larger technology stack review or a roadmap process where you're looking at all of your technology and not just an individual point system. So it's important to really go beyond what the product does, and that certainly will come out in those functional conversations that you have. And you'll want to think about a lot of these other aspects I'm going to go through here. And certainly if you have other things that you're thinking about when you're making decisions that you want to share with the group, feel free to add those to the chat as well, because I think everyone would certainly love to benefit from that. The first I'll mention is one that's often best seen in a demo scenario when you brought a vendor in to look at their tool, and that's, what does it look like? What is the user experience like? And this is a really important one. We often talk about form versus function, and while functionality is critical, how easy the tool is to use is going to play a really significant role in user adoption. So if people don't like the experience, they can often look past other shortcomings, but it can, if it's a bad user experience, get in the way of even the best tool. So think about the role that user experience will play and how well your users are willing to accept that tool once it's implemented. Compatibility with current systems, such as a CRM or financial software. So if you are in particular looking at fundraising technology, how well does the tool integrate with your CRM to make sure your donor transactions are being added to your CRM constituent records? And how easily do the dollars make it to your finance system, get appropriately designated to the funds where you're expecting them to? Those are some key ones when you're looking at fundraising software. Extensibility, somewhat related to compatibility, but more speaking to things like integration and whether or not there are additional features that can grow what your tool can do for you. So if you were looking at a nonprofit CRM like Nonprofit Success Pack from Salesforce, how extensible is the product? Does it have a marketplace of tools that vendors are adding plugins and additional functionality that can make that base CRM more powerful and capable of delivering more business value to your organization? Again, because we're talking about fundraising, currency support, payment method support, payment processor support are all things you really want to consider. So what currencies are you accepting? If you're taking money in from other countries, do you need to be able to convert it to a local currency? Do you have bank accounts in different countries? Do you need to be able to accept those currencies locally? And an increasingly important one is payment methods, as we see a proliferation of the types of ways people can pay for donations. Does the tool that you're looking to bring in support those different methods? One of the ones we hear a lot, mobile wallets is one where some products are still trailing a little bit to bring those in, but it's just a question you want to be sure to ask. How far do they go beyond the basic forms of credit card payments? Do you get bank direct withdrawals processed, PayPal, Venmo? There's so many tools. And then, do you have a preferred payment processor? Are you contracted for exclusivity? Sometimes you'll like the tool, but it only works with Stripe, and you may have a different processor in place. So is your accounting team going to be okay with dealing with multiple accounts where money's coming in? And how do you resolve some of that? If you're in markets that have different languages, does the tool support those languages, both for the front end experience as well as for your staff, if you've got staff users that are also working in those languages? And a lot of tools will put an emphasis on the front end, but sometimes not the back. So be sure to inquire about that when you're doing your investigation. Another one we see, especially at Heller with the kind of organizations we deal with, is this issue of multi-affiliate support. And what I'm talking about there is for national organizations that have affiliates or chapters, you might want to look at whether the tool offers features that support multiple business units. So that could be being able to maintain a hierarchy so that you can have functionality like user management that's granular or cascaded down the organization. You may want roll-up reporting so that all those small community events are raising money, but it's rolling right up into a territory level or to a national level. They may each need their own merchant accounts depending on how you're constituted as an organization. So that's another key thing to think about. And another important one, especially for things like peer-to-peer fundraising, is having templating support. So if you're setting out a brand control at a national or a state level, you may be able to push that template down to your community offices who don't have as many resources to control design, and they're more focused on managing the constituents that are taking part in those events. So multi-affiliate support can sometimes be a big deal. And the last one on this slide is compliance. So we're really living in a privacy-first world, and this is evident by the changes that are happening where we see move away from cookies and the proliferation of regional privacy regulations. Constituents want control of their contact information in terms of who can talk to them and when. So we also have accessibility regulations, data governance regulations, regulations tied to things like health, financial information. So make sure that the company that you choose is investing in these types of things, because it's only going to be in both of your best interest for that to happen to mitigate risk. We look at functions like system and maintenance. So buying technology is one thing, but people and process play a huge role in a successful adoption. So how much staff support, effort, and expense will be required to maintain the system post-launch? And do you have the staff resourcing to handle that? Security, does it have the necessary safeguards to make sure the important data that you're trusted with is being protected? So a good case here is to potentially consider a centralized team, whether it's your IT department or even a multi-department steering committee that can look at technology purchases and set out some minimum standards so that you don't have departmental users procuring software on their own without being mindful of the importance of security and regulatory compliance. Ongoing support and implementation, depending on the type of software, it may be a partner vendor who is actually doing the implementation. So understanding what that looks like and what your ongoing support options are going to look like, whether it's human provided or automated. Is it real time? Is it channel specific like phone, email, or chat? And are there things like knowledge bases or different tiers of support that you can access? From a training perspective, this could be a really important one if you don't have a lot of IT staff at your organization. So does the vendor provide that service? And what kind of training is available? Could be classroom training, on demand, or self-paced courses. And will the vendor customize that training to your particular scenarios? Another one that's very important is a product roadmap. Do they have a plan for where they're taking their product? So you want to make sure you're investing in a vendor who's investing in their own future and has a regular cycle of releases so that you know that there's a methodical approach to how they're growing and scaling their product, and whether or not they take customer input into account when they're developing out features. These are all things that can help you avoid that outliving your product risk that we talked about at the beginning. Sometimes client experience is important. Nonprofit experience is often cited by clients we work with as wanting to see in the vendors they work with. Certainly for fundraising products, that's a given. But if you're looking at something like event software that's not just tied specifically to nonprofit organizations, you may also look at whether, if you're a large organization, has the vendor worked with clients of your size and complexity, if you can't find one that has specific nonprofit client experience. And then the last couple come back more to the cost, the money. So when you're looking at open source versus commercial, are you willing to look at open source when you're going to be taking on potentially a little bit more risk with something that is community supported? Certainly there's a lot of great innovation happening in open source, but you really are dependent on how active the community is that is behind the project you're looking at. And you'll want to make sure, similarly with a commercial vendor, that there's a product roadmap that the community is maintaining and a commitment to keep that product up to date. But if you are less risk averse, then perhaps a commercial option may be something that's more suited to your selection. And lastly, I left cost till the end, but it's probably the first thing you're looking at when you're going to a vendor website. It's usually the last thing they'll want to tell you when you're doing a selection process. Just like you probably don't want to tell them what your budget is because you assume they're going to price it to your budget. So I found that transparency from both sides is really key, because otherwise you find yourself, like with car shopping, you may have the budget to afford a domestic compact car. And then if you go shopping on a luxury car lot, you're disappointed when you realize you love the car, but you can't afford it. So I find that it's really better to be transparent about budget and cost at the beginning so that you're not wasting each other's time going down a road that maybe doesn't have a positive ending. When we think about the ways organizations approach their technology, we tend to see a couple of different categories here. There's those who pursue a bit of a best of breed product and solution offering, and others who like to build around the platforms, like the ones I mentioned, like Salesforce or Dynamics 365. So products tend to have that more single focus, or they get bundled together into a set of features where you have a vendor who's providing support, updates, training, and doing the integrations. There's usually a less time to market with these types of solutions, and they're often considered sort of best of breed or very focused on a single task, but they may still require additional services where you have to go and find your own payment processor or add some additional features to make them fully deliver what you want. Whereas a platform tends to be for those organizations that are really hoping for more deep customization, but still in a low to no code environment. So you'll see these marketplaces built around the platforms to offer that extended functionality that they can have if they want to combine some best of breed options with that underlying platform. But the challenge with the platforms is they do typically require more skilled staffing resources to maintain, because you are maintaining that ecosystem for your organization a little more so than you would with a software as service approach for a product. So there's some different ways you can be looking at how you make the decision about what technology you're going to choose. And regardless of the approach you're using to building out your stack, you should really make sure you know as an organization how you're going to make those decisions and how you're going to evaluate technology. What's the most valuable to you in terms of your ecosystem feature set? What do you prioritize? And you might consider all of these that I've got listed here, or maybe only some of them. Some of the factors may weigh more heavily in your decision-making than others. And I'll just go quickly through because I know we've got about 7 minutes left in our session. So the first one is organization first, designing the software around your best practices and processes and data standards that benefit the entire organization. So this is where you may have more centralized control over decision-making. The contrast to this would be people make decisions at a department level. So you get a bit more of that Wild West scenario where people are more interested in solving problems quickly that meet their individual needs, and there's less focus on how that might trickle over and impact another part of the business. The second point is around security. So you may have a really rigid set of security standards that every solution must pass before it gets installed. So the opposite of that would be a focus on, let's just make sure we can access these tools easily and keep things a little looser to make sure that our staff have access to do what they need to do. So that's where you're trading off a little bit of security for the flexibility and ease of access. Scalability. So if you estimate that you'll be looking to scale up and have large data volumes in future scenarios, then you'll want to make sure that even if you have a small current volume of data, you're planning ahead. The opposite of this would be not worrying about what happens in the future and focusing when you're looking at scale with the vendor on whatever your current state is. The fourth one is about accuracy. So this is about designing a technology system that provides the most accurate, reliable data and minimizes any risk of data being inconsistent across the board. The opposite of this, similar to the security one, is that you've got a focus more on ease of use and maintaining current processes. Maybe your organization isn't ready for the change that would be required to have people upend everything and focus on how to keep the data as clean as possible. Checks and balances. Do you want to focus, and is your organization accustomed to creating business processes and roles to support that accuracy, or do you like to let people have more autonomy in their own roles and let them make their own choices? Automation. You may be an organization that's really trying to drive forward the use of automation because you may have limitations on staffing resources and you're trying to find ways to be more efficient. The contrast would be staying where people are comfortable, and maybe that is those workarounds that people are using Excel and other ways to do things for that could be solved with automation. And finally, we've got supporter focused. So are you making choices that are in the best interest of what your constituent experience will be like, or are you driving your decisions based on what's working for staff and what's worked before and what people are used to? So these are just the few of the ways you want to be assessing things. A few other questions I want to leave you with before we wrap up. Does the tool already exist that you're looking for? And that's where we go back to that original diagramming. You may not even realize that you've got two or three. Pardon me? You may not realize you've got some tools already in place that that you're looking to shop for, and that process at the beginning will help will surface those. Thinking about the other parts of that technology triangle of technology, people, and process, do you have the resources to not only now, but in the future, support an implementation and ongoing operation of this new tool you're shopping for? And do you have business processes, and are you flexible on those? And if in the event that the technology requires that you adopt your process to the tool? And in terms of change, have you been through major change recently? And if so, do you have a process for handling that? Because change management's a key piece of any new technology. Final point on this is, how formal is your shopping process? Do you have a procurement process that requires an RFI or an RFP? If you're looking for smaller tools, RFI is probably sufficient, but if you're looking for large scale solutions in the 6-figure plus range, you're probably going to want to go through a more formalized RFP process, and the vendors in that space are more accustomed to doing that as well. Last slide I'll leave you with is, what do you do to get started? So we've talked a lot about questions you can be asking yourself, and it can seem overwhelming knowing where to start your journey. So there's a few things here I've identified. Start with the vendor websites. You'll find some great high-level overview of features on the product pages, but sometimes demos and case studies will really help you see the product in action. Often vendors will have resource tabs that have reports and white papers that can help you learn more about the whole category of software that you're shopping in. But just be mindful, there will be vendor bias in these resources because many are paying for those reports to be created on their behalf. YouTube is another fantastic resource, second most used search engine behind Google, and it's got a wealth of I would say vendor and user generated content like demos and product reviews, training content. Talk to your peers like those who are here today. And finally, look into some of the product research websites that are out there. I put a few listed here that are helpful. You'll see that some of them will cover widely the types of tools that are out there, and I find they're a really great source of just learning what tools even exist, because you'll find tons in these sites that you've never heard of. But once you start browsing by category, you'll start to surface a few that you weren't even aware existed, either that weren't in your geographic area, that maybe are really popular in another country. So there's a few tips for you just to get started. And if you're looking at the resources slide later, we've just put a few posts here that you can get some further information on, some guides, as well as some podcasts to listen to that will provide some additional information. Certainly, if you check out the collaborative notes tied to the session, you'll find all of this there. And of course, if you'd like to learn more, get some help with your selection, I'd be happy to discuss further, and you'll find my contact information on the collaborative notes. So I know we didn't get a lot of time for questions. I think I stay around a little bit later if anybody wanted to ask any questions in the chat, but hope you enjoy the rest of your time at NTC, and look forward to seeing some of you in the other sessions.